Welcome to Door to Door Insider, where we take a deep dive into the mindset, the why, and the how of the industry's top entrepreneurs, leaders, recruiters, and salespeople. We are the Door to Door Nation. Here is your host, Lee Barber. Let's go.
All right, gang. Welcome to Door to Door Insider. Today's special guest is Chris Pierce. Chris is married for 17 years, and he has 3 wonderful children, 2 boys and 1 girl, and they all live in Hawaii, which I don't think anybody can complain about. Chris is a mental toughness expert, and I have been following Chris on Instagram and some of his socials and what he does for some of the door-to-door community and reps with mental toughness. So Chris, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, man. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited.
I'm excited to have a good conversation. I love talking mental toughness.
I love mental toughness too. So we were talking a little bit before the podcast got started, and I've seen in my career in door to door, and really in sales in general, because I was in sales at a transportation company for 9 or 10 years before I started the doors.
Wow.
And mental toughness is one of the most important aspects. I think you have the mental aspect and the spiritual aspect in sales. And when you can deal with those in a professional manner, I think it really helps people to learn to do that. So I'm excited to have you here. So I like to start with, I want to get into mental toughness and what that is and what that means to you. But I'd like to get a little bit of your history. Like what got you on the track to focus in on mental toughness? What's a little bit of your back history?
Yeah, I mean, the short of it, I studied exercise science. I always wanted to do something more than just like sit in an office.
Yeah.
Which here I am sitting in an office. But,
Me too.
Anyway, so I studied exercise science, always been very active, and went on to grad school. Also studied exercise science, but didn't really know what I wanted to do as like an end result. And so I took a whole gamut of classes because there are all these different tracks. And I took a class called Philosophy of Movement, and the teacher was a professor named Dr. Ken Ravizza. And it's funny, I've got his book here. It's like my Bible.
What's the book called?
It's called Heads Up Baseball. So he spent 40 plus years working in professional baseball, training mental toughness. And he was one of really the godfathers of applied sports psychology. So he spent far less time researching and way more time helping people.
Got it.
And so taking that first class, I was like, this is what I want to do. This is amazing. You can get people better at what they're already good at simply by teaching them how to use their head. And so that it resonated with me. I grew up, I was not one of those that just did one sport and was really good at it. I did everything from soccer, baseball, to swimming, water polo, surfing. So I did a lot of different things. And so I could see that and the importance of it. And yeah, so that's how I got into it.
That's a lot, man. That's pretty. So when you were growing up, you were playing a lot of sports. Where did you grow up at, Chris?
I grew up in San Diego.
Okay. So you're just an ocean kid, man. You're out in Hawaii now.
I am. I'm limited to where I can live because I'll die if I'm not in the water like a fish.
So when you were a kid and you were into all the sports, was that family, or were you just sports driven mentally, or what was the attraction to sports in the beginning? Because it seems like that's really what fed into, and I guess I would have you unpack that a little bit as well, because when we really get into the core of a person, like you've found something that you love, but when you're going through all of those sports, I think a lot of the people that are, we have a pretty big diversification in sales, but a lot of people that are really high level salespeople gamify the sale. And we have a lot of athletes in our industry, a lot of people that aren't athletes either, but this people that I see that were athletes, they gamify, and there's a lot of, it's mental toughness. So in those early years, as you were getting made in the sports, what were those experiences like, and how did you take those into your later years?
Yeah, I think, I didn't realize it at the time, But that first sports psych class that I mentioned, it's called Philosophy of Movement. And it talked about how in all cultures across all time, how important movement has been, right? And so a lot of cultures have dance, a lot of them have competition, and that's always been part of just being human. And I think in that class, I realized looking back that we find joy in movement, but we also find joy in skill, right? So not just like movement, not just like, I don't know, moving, but doing something with a purpose and working hard to execute and accomplish something. And so for me, that's always what it was about. If I was, surfing, it was always trying to do something new. If I'm swimming, it's trying to get faster. If I'm playing baseball, right, it's increasing my it's RBIs or my hits.
It's cognitive,
better fielding,
cognitive physical improvement. I love it.
Exactly. And I think the biggest thing for me was finding joy in that. And I think the same thing is true in sales. And I think a lot of people just aren't aware of it, that the reason that you're in sales is because you enjoy movement. You enjoy the cognitive difficulty of it. You enjoy growth and developing and pushing yourself. And I think that's a common thread, like
it is
throughout the industry.
So it's interesting when you're just talking, I'm reading a book right now that was prescribed to me by my friend Ty Williams. He's the VP Sunrun. Super great. Do you know Ty?
I do.
Yeah,
I do. Ty's awesome.
Love Ty, man. He's just a wealth of information. So he recommended It Takes What It Takes. And if I'm honest with you, I started the book and then I quit. So because it was just sports. And I'm not a sports guy. I compete with myself. But I didn't grow up with sports, but I understand the methodology of sports. But it was and so I stopped about 20 minutes into the book, and then I interviewed Jordan Williams, his brother, and Jordan said it. And so I'm like, man, two of the greats, two of the industry goats have recommended this book. So, but what the book is talking, It Takes What It Takes, and it's talking about this. It's this cognitive approach to being great and doing whatever you're doing. And right now, the part in the book that I'm on is it's like, if you want to be successful, you don't have a lot of options, because to be successful, you literally have to do what it takes. And there are very few pathways to great success. It takes mental fortitude, spiritual fortitude. It takes a lot of grit. It takes doing really hard things repetitively, continuously. And all of this really revolves around a cognitive approach to mental toughness, because that's what, we said, me and you talked before the podcast, and I call it rep suicide. And what they'll do is they get this fear or these anxieties or these financial pressures or this belief that they can't do it, or they cross compare with other people, and they're literally, living in the problem. And the solution is, finding that mental fortitude and that toughness. And it can be seen in sports and in sales. And I love how you're talking about the cross between the two, because I see so many. So exactly what you're talking about in this moment is exactly, and this book, now that I'm reading it, I'm on like my third week, because I have to stop it and go back and go back and go back. So I'm like, man, it's so relatable to sales, these high level sports individuals. So yeah, I'm tracking exactly what you're saying. It's on point, man. Love it.
It's repetitive tasks with a specific outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it.
Whether you're talking sales or sports, like that's what it boils down to.
Well, and getting better, and there's ways to get better. There's proven methodologies in all of these things. If we go all the way back to Jim Rohn talking, or just Stephen, it doesn't matter who it is. There's proven methodologies to get better, and you need and just like with anything, you need coaching, you need education, you need schooling, you need content, you need other players on the field that are trying to be better. So yeah, I love it. So that's cool to hear, growing up in San Diego, playing all the different sports. So how long were you in school? Because it sounds like you went through a pretty good gambit of, determining what you wanted to be, from sports movements to sports philosophy to getting into mental toughness. How many years were you in school for that?
Yeah, so I did the 4 years undergraduate school, and then I did another 3 to get my master's. And so luckily I found that I took that class the first semester. And so I'm like, okay, I'm doing this track. And so I spent 3 years, and it actually ended up being that teacher, Ken Revisa, the last class that he taught I got, and he announced his retirement. So I was just so grateful to be mentored and learn from one of the greats in the field of sports psychology. But one of the greatest lessons that he learned, or that I learned, that he taught me, was he said, all of this is worthless unless you help someone. That's the only design is to help someone. And so he made us uncomfortably go out and find someone to help. He's like, look, you can go talk to the soccer team or whatever teams we've got here, and they all know that you guys are coming. But if you really want to push it and push yourself, get outside the school, go find somebody that you can, you have to like cold call them, just show up.
Go get uncomfortable.
Yeah. And so that weekend there was a surf contest, and I grew up surfing. And so I'm like, oh man, surfers totally need this. So went down to the contest, met some guys. That following week, I'm in the gym with the top surfers in Southern California with this group called Dean Sports Consultants. And for the next 3 years, I spent working with, some of the top athletes. One of them I worked with one-on-one for that whole time. And he's currently ranked second in the world. Wow. And it's amazing surfing to see. Yeah. In surfing
it is a tactical sport, man. It is not to be underestimated. That's awesome.
It really is.
So help me understand where, and we'll pull back and forth here. So where's Chris today? I mean, it looks to me, I follow you on socials and I see what you do. It looks like a lot of what you're focused on today. And because I want to tie how we got, so I want the listeners to have a good understanding of where we are today. And then we'll go back and tie into how we got here from the sports, because a lot of what you're doing, it sounds like to me, you went from the technical aspects of physical training and how to get better faster in those methodologies. And now you're in the mental aspects of being tougher, better, faster mentally. So what is Chris's world today? So I know, what's the business that you own?
Yeah, it's called Sales Resilience.
Mm-hmm. And so Sales Resilience focuses on
training mental toughness for sales professionals.
I love it. This is my stuff right here. So how did we get from the physical, from sports, into the mental? I think I know the answer, because it's kind of a natural. To be good at, you have to have this, but I'd like to tie those two things together. How do we go from training sports athletes to mental toughness and sales?
Yeah, well, so I did the whole thing with the surfers for a while, and then had a really cool opportunity to work with the Army, training special operations, Army Rangers, and that's been the bulk of my career. I did that for 9 years. And so that was what I was doing. And then I don't know if you know Tosh McIntosh. He's president of sales with Aptive Pest Control. Anyway, so he was like a friend of my wife's from high school, and he came out to Hawaii and we just had dinner, and he's the one that introduced me to sales. And he basically was like, the sales world needs what you're doing with the military. If you can teach Green Berets to keep calm in a combat scenario, then you can teach salesmen to keep calm on somebody's doorstep.
Yeah,
right.
I love it.
And, and one of the foundational things that Ken Revisa taught was, if you can't control your mind, then you can't control your body. And if you can't control your body, then you can't control your skill set. And I think there's such a strong emphasis on the skills, right? Like every company is training how to sell and even training mindset. And all of these things are only applicable if you can control yourself in the first place. And so that's my goal, and my objective really is to help individuals to use the skill set that they've learned at a high level.
I love that. So, it's funny because so in the beginning of my career, I've knocked with some pretty amazing human beings. And the longer people are on doors, the more the more you understand the levels of professionalism that take place. And I used to, and the best way I would describe it is I would be on doors with guys sometimes, and I've knocked with some industry greats, and I would think, man, that guy just hypnotized that guy. Like, how did that happen? But as I grew and I learned, it was their body, it was their mind, it was the literal energy that they were putting out in that moment on that doorstep to that human being. And what I teach now a lot in my classes is the homeowner doesn't know if you're nervous or why. They know that you're nervous, but not why you're nervous. They could think, oh man, this guy's trying to jump over my back wall. There's something's going to happen. This is some kind of setup. You're nervous because you don't know the pitch well enough, or you haven't been exposed to it enough. And so what you're saying about controlling the body is massive, because those moments of ultimate control on that doorstep come from the way that you're controlling your body, from breaking through the icebreakers initially, getting into the qualifying process on the door, all the way to closing the deal. You'll talk to reps and they have that butterfly feeling when they know they have to ask for the power bill or to come in the house to close the alarm or whatever it is. And the more you learn to control that fear or that anxiety in the moment, the more legitimate you appear to the homeowner, and the more you own that process. And so the later I got into my career, and the more I started owning that doorstep and my physical abilities myself, and just not having the butterflies and understanding the transitions. I mean, what you're saying is on point. I mean, it's just money. So what are some of the things that you see most commonly and you do quite a bit of door to door, Chris, in the sales?
Like myself,
No, just
going door.
no, training us, our community.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, I would say 99%. I've got a friend who I work with who's in commercial real estate. But other than that, different. It's all, so, at the moment, it is all door to door.
What I love is, like, I'm like, who's going to do my mental training? And like, well, the guy who used to train the special forces. So I'm like, that qualifies you right there. So what do you see? What are some of the most common things that you see in door to door reps that you identify specifically, where are areas that you can help teach them? What do you see across the board?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems, and it's not just in this industry, it's the same thing in sports too, is there's so much emphasis put on learning, right? Like, I've got all these books back here, right? Mm-hmm. And people learn and educate themselves, but they lack a system for implementation, right? So they're kind of left on their own to, like, I read grit, so I know that I need to have perseverance, and I need to have grit, but like, okay, well, that's really vague. So what does that actually mean for me in my day to day? And so because there's a lot of guys, I get asked all the time, like, what's the difference between people who thrive under pressure and those who crumble and fail under pressure? And it's very simple to answer. Those who thrive under pressure fall and default to their fundamentals, right? They get super honed in, ultra focused on the fundamentals. And those who break under pressure are searching for some external thing, and they quit doing their fundamentals. And so I would say 9.9 times out of 10, when people are struggling in this industry for whatever reason, they're not doing at least one of the fundamentals, and typically they're not doing most of the fundamentals.
Wow, man. I have to go back and listen to that 5 times, because so I experienced that with my team members over the years in the different aspects of different jobs that I performed in so many ways. And that really just categorizes it right. And, so for me, that was money right there. So for me, I have these fundamentals, and they've been built up through my entire life. I've had to have grit. So I didn't reading a book, I needed to have there. I've been in situations in my life where I had to have grit. There was no way out. This is what was happening.
Yeah.
Period. Deal with it. Right. Grit. Like, okay. So I had some of those fundamentals in them. And later, as I got into educating myself in almost everything, and really it's been in from doors, like this career makes you grow as a human being. If you're going to be in it, if you're going to be in it successfully, you have to grow as a human being. So for me, reading the books, what it did was it enlightened me into some of the core things that I had intrinsically in me. And so I would read and I'd be like, wow, this is why I do that. Oh man, I have this is how I can make it better. But I see what you're saying, because there's different types of people that will come in, those that just kind of are able to muscle through it, that have that thing. And then those who kind of crumble under the pressure because they've read it, but they don't have it. And then immediately what they do is they start blaming every single thing around them, everything. I just had a text thread. It's the meeting. It's the this, it's the that, it's the this, it's the that. It's everything but them. And it sounds like what you're saying is it's because they don't have those fundamentals. And so they go exterior. So, man, money, that was the money shot. So how do you teach them? How do you get that person out of their head and get them the fundamentals and get them inward? Because in my experience, it's difficult to get somebody who is blaming everything externally to just get a mirror in front of their face and say, listen, if everything is an external problem, you have no power to fix any of it. What you need to do is take ultimate responsibility for everything and start working on that. But it's been in my career, it's been a hard thing to get those people to turn that key. In your experience, how do you get them to do it?
Well, it's an interesting balance, because what happens is external things are coming at them, but it's not the external things that are the problem. It's the internal process that they're going through. So they're actually stuck inside, and all the internal, interpretations of what's happening is the real problem. And so you got a few options. One, you can deal with all of those perceptions and interpretations, which is vital, but it's more of a long-term solution. A quick solution that you should also take is you need to switch from an internal focus to a task focus. So not just an external focus, but specifically a task focus, meaning you are going to execute something, right? Because when you're doing something, you're focused on that thing. And when you're focused on it, then you can do it at a high level. And so, one of the biggest things is helping people understand that concept, understand like what's going on, but then give them something to do. When you're thrown off, what do you do, right? What is the action to take? Because if, you look at like all the books that are on like mental toughness or mindset or any of those things, a lot of them are very, theoretical.
Yeah. Application is missing. Right.
Yeah. It's very it's conceptual. It's based on, anyway. So my whole approach is simply giving people the actions to take, both preventatively and after something horrible happens. The cops get called on you, you're all flustered, right?
Got kicked out of a neighborhood. How do you react?
Yeah. And it's not just about sure, there's an aspect of understanding yourself and understanding how you respond to things, but there's also, and what I think is more important is what are the next steps that you're going to take? And so teaching guys to do that solves a lot of problems before they ever arise. And it's cool because all those external things are still happening. They're all still hitting them in the face. They're still getting knocked down, but they have a strategy in place so that they either don't get knocked down as much, and also they don't get knocked down as hard.
That's money, so it just goes back to Dr. Covey, and you don't see the world as it is. you see the world as you think it is. And it goes to the paradigm of the two people standing on the beach. And one person believes that the world is flat, and the other person believes that the world is round. So it's two people looking at the same beach and the same horizon and the same sky and the same ocean, but with two completely different concepts of that reality. And what I'm picking up is, if you and I are in the same situation, in the same office, in the same company, in the same neighborhoods, with the same objections and the same doors and the same problems and the same everything structurally is the same. And I'm dealing with problems in one way, and you're dealing problems in another way. And I'm dealing with them in a more effective manner because the way that I'm constructed inside interprets problems. So, and this is exactly how I deal with problems. Action. If I see a problem, I want to find a solution, and then I try and take 5 times the action on it to solve it, whether it's this thing or that thing. Is what can I do to take act? Those are my natural, because when I don't, I start to get uncomfortable personally. But I see, and I've seen in this industry, this industry is like you can really put people under a microscope and watch them, how they're going to react. And you have other people with the same issues that are just, it's destroying them internally. And that's what I call the rep suicide, because they become overwhelmed with fear, overwhelmed with anxiety, overwhelmed with financial insecurities. And it's all of these external things. So it's the two guys on the beach, both have different views. We're both getting the same problems. It's sales. When doors are doors. Doors are going to treat everybody the same. It's how we interact with that door. It's going to be the same objections, the same problems. Solar, there can be some variations in the products, the solar, the panels, the PPWs and things like this, but it's just like alarms. Listen, we're putting a panel on your wall. We're going to put some sensors on your doors. There's going to be a couple. It's the same with solar. Listen, we're going to put panels on the roof. They're going to produce electricity. But when you just look at the door aspect of it and the issues and the difficulties of being a professional door knocker, they're very similar. And I love what you're saying, because it really helps me identify why some people are dealing with things differently. And it's because of the inside construct. I love that.
Well, and if you look at it from a scientific, like neurology perspective, it's shifting the pathways that your thinking is experiencing, right? Because what happens, right, is we have information that comes in, right? It comes through our senses, right? Our eyes, our ears, right? And the way that we interpret it is going to be based on experience. It's going to be based on, perception. But all of that interpretation, it either is going to go through the amygdala, which is the primitive brain.
Mm-hmm. Caveman brain.
Exactly. Which the caveman brain seeks comfort, right? And seeks, it seeks to escape threat, right? And so if you're functioning through the amygdala, then the first thing that goes is critical thinking, right? Because you don't need to think critically. You just need to escape. You need to run away. And so people wonder, like, I was so stupid. Why did I say that? Well, it's because you're functioning from the amygdala and not your prefrontal cortex. And so if you can shift to thinking from the prefrontal cortex, this is that part where if you can control your mind, then you can control your body, then you can control the skills, then you'll say the right things at the right times, because you're literally physically, your brain is functioning at a higher level from the place that it can actually use the skill set. And it's not your fault if you're like, well, it is your fault. There is something you can do.
Everything's your fault. Yeah.
It's your brain that's doing it, functioning from the amygdala and not the prefrontal cortex. And so I think when people understand that, it's less abstract and it's less like, oh, think positive and all of this. And it's like, okay, well, what are the steps to function from my prefrontal cortex and not to stop at the amygdala?
I love it. So listen, anybody that's heard me talk, I talk about Covey so much. I mean, 7 Habits was a book that changed my life. But what he talks about, and I'm just putting this together because he says, if you can change the way you see things, you'll change the way you do things, and therefore you'll change what you get. And again, it's very abstract. My mom used to say, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at will change. And when you're in a tough situation, listen, great, 7 habits, amazing. Thanks, Covey. Change the way I see things, and I'll change the way I do things, and I'll change when I get. But what you're talking about is that's, so I always think of the brain as, well, for what it is. It's a computer, and our subconscious has codes written into it in the manner in which we perceive situations. We have different traumas or different experiences, and our brain has a code underwritten in it. And so what you're talking about is helping people identify the way that they're intaking certain information, certain tough things, how they're dealing with that, and getting away from the confines of the caveman brain, the runaway, the fight and flight, into a more cognitive skill set by identifying exactly how they're reacting now and transferring that into a higher level of thought so they can operate at a different level. So actually giving an application to the 7 habits, which is a great book, but just hearing you unpack it, I'm like, wow, I wonder how many thoughts I have in my, well, I know I have a lot of thoughts in my caveman brain. I'm a knuckle dragger, man. I just get through it. So that's amazing, man. So that's obviously one of the biggest things that you see. How do you get people through that process? What are the, obviously you get paid to do this, and we want to, plug some of that stuff. And just hearing you, I can listen and hear that you obviously bring, you're highly qualified through your education, but then years of practice with professional sports, and then high level military training. You're obviously very qualified to do the job, and I can tell that you know what you're saying. But what are the processes that you get through, that you start? Is it an individual process that you qualify somebody and kind of see where their mind is at and how they're dealing with things, and how do you get somebody into that cycle?
So yes and no. I would say that that yes, everyone's unique, everyone's individual. We all have our own different neural pathways that we've experienced, and but at the same time, there are scientifically proven things that you can do. And each step will be unique to you as a person, but the step is still the same, right? And it's super simple systems. If it's not simple, nobody's going to do it.
Agreed.
Right? Simple doesn't mean easy. And one of the biggest things that I found when people apply this system is they think it's hard. But it's not hard, it's new. And there's a difference. Like playing baseball is not hard. And if you've just never done it, it's not that it's a difficult task. It's just that it's new and you need more practice. And so a lot of people, what happens is they take these steps, and they might choose a few of them that they like, and they'll do it here and there. And of course, they're not getting that good at it, and it's not making a big impact because they're not doing all of it, and they're not doing it consistently. So I'll give you the steps. I call it, well, there's a few things to it, but the steps are very basic. First one is connect to the reason why you're out there in the first place. Your why is only as strong as your connection to it. And so if things are going well, keep reminding yourself of the reason that you're out there, and that momentum will keep going, right? If things are going poorly and it sucks and you're struggling, then reminding yourself of why you're out there is gonna help hopefully trigger you and get you back into doing hard things, right? So that's step one. Step two is identifying the actions you're going to take, because the results are only a byproduct of your actions. And so the more clear you are with, these are the steps I'm going to take, right? Literally, you are knocking on a door, saying something, responding, right? And so if you can identify what those are, just like a baseball player, I'm going to step up to bat, I'm going to hit the plate 2 times, take 2 practice swings, I'm going to keep my eye on the ball, swing at the appropriate time. Done. Right. And if you run through that in your head, then when they answer the door, you're going to be way more ready than if you're just like doing whatever. Yeah. Right. Step 3 is get your energy to the right place. And for a long time, I would teach box breathing. That's a big thing that they teach in the military. There's been more newer research that shows a more specific way to breathe. If anybody listens to the Huberman Lab podcast, this is what he teaches, and it's the fastest way to. And it's not about relaxation; it's about readiness. It's the fastest way to turn off the fight or flight to just get you into a state of readiness. And I can talk for days about the science of it, but for here, it's simply you inhale through the nose. And then when you think you've got enough, do another one. All right. And then let it out nice and slow. Because I will talk a little bit of science. Basically that last bit of expansion, it sends these signals to your brain saying that you are in a good place and that there's no threat. So turn off any fight or flight. You're good. You're good to go. Okay. And the way that they measure that is through heart rate variability. Okay. And so what's happening when you take that extra inhale, the way that you change heart rate variability has to do with pressure. And that last little bit hits those pressure sensors to send those signals to increase the heart rate variability. Anyway.
So it's legit. It's the real deal.
I can nerd out on it. But the reason I think that it's so important for people to understand is it's not a relaxation technique. This isn't something to do when you're stressed out. This is something to do before every single door, right? You connect with why you're there. You identify the actions you're going to take. You take this weird double nostril breath, exhale, and then you knock on the door. Now, while you knock on the door, there's some other really fascinating research. It's called the quiet eye, is what the researcher calls it. And it's this idea that high performers' eyes move less. But through the research, they've also found that lower performers' eyes move more. But also, if somebody's eyes move less, it can increase their performance. So it works both ways. Quiet
eyes.
Yeah. And so simply what I have people do is choose something to focus on. So, I mean, I'm giving you my whole system, all the secrets away.
Well, no, I mean, but there's a lot of steps in between that, I think, between analyzing what's going on with the human. I mean, it's not, I think listen, change the way you see things, change the way you do things, change the way you get things sounds easy when you're reading it. Like, listen, change your why, get your why, change your actions, do your energy and breath, and then realize that people with quiet eyes, if they have rapid movements, it'll help them. So I think all this helps to an degree to hear it, but to actually learn something. Well, it's easy so listen, we can talk baseball. Okay. So there's going to be, 3 guys in the outfield. There's going to be 3 guys in bases. There's going to be a pitcher. There's going to be a batter. There's going to be a catcher. And all you need to do is just go up to the plate and hit the ball. So it's easy to explain something, but it's different to actually get on the field and practice it. And I agree with you. And so really quick before we move on past that, so it's a paradigm, right? Like what you're talking about is, most people do perceive something new as hard, whether that's changing careers, whether that's knocking a door, whether that's playing a sport, whether that's going to the gym for the first time, whether that's a new diet plan, whether that's, engaging with people in a different way, whether that's reading if they don't read. It sounds hard. And that paradigm of hard really is the wrong way to look at it. It's new. And if you switch the way you view things, and so that can be simple. But I love what you said, because most people do, and I do. I'm not any different. I'm most people. I see something new and I'm like, that's going to be hard. But you're right, is if you change that perception of it and you say, listen, it's just new and I have to do what new people do, and new people have to figure everything out. And so I love that, because when you're approaching self-betterment and what we're talking about here, I mean, even just listening to some of this, I'm like, there's some hard stuff in there. Like just getting down to practicing a why every time, or your breathing or your eye movements. It's like, it takes practice. So I love that, man.
And if you never did anything new and you only did the things that you were good at, your life would suck. Like you wouldn't do anything, right? I mean, you would have learned how to walk.
Yeah. Well,
right? You've already done hard stuff or new stuff.
New stuff. Well, and it's challenges. It's everything worth, but a lot of people, we see that I think in the door-to-door community, I've talked to people and, they have low incomes, or they didn't finish school, or whatever's going on in their life. They did finish school and they still have a low income, and you have a decent income, and you're talking to them, and like, well, what would you do to make $100,000 a year? Well, I'd do anything. Well, just come and knock some. Well, anything but that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the perception of something that seems so hard and so difficult that I would do anything. Well, what would you do? What would you do to get in shape? I'd do anything. Well, go to the gym for 3 days a week. Well, anything but that.
Yeah.
It's the anything but that, so like, I love it because it's this perception of thinking that hard things, and that, I think that's where I'm at in my life, is I don't really believe in hard things. I believe in doing the things that I need to do to get better on a daily basis, whether that's reading or listening to podcasts or going to the gym or my diet or my team, or getting advice, taking advice, listening to people like you. And this is why I do the podcast. I mean, I love it for the listeners, but it just feeds my brain as well, is to, to just have conversations like these. So I love it, man. So what does it look like for you? What's the workflow? How do you take people through these processes?
Yeah. I mean, at first it's just having them understand it and then practice. So just like you would, a sport, it's like, okay, this is what you're going to do. And people learn best when they do,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like when they go through the motions of it, they're going to learn faster.
Yeah.
And so I get people going right away. And the amazing thing that happens is when you shift, and it's probably the hardest aspect of the whole thing, right? You can go through, connecting with your why, identifying your actions, getting your energy, taking that breath, and then, quieting your eyes. You can do all of that and still struggle,
Mm-hmm.
because it's new,
Mm-hmm.
right? But at the end of the day, it really is just a matter of repetition. And I guess the struggle that people have is they go through all the motions, but they still are so connected to the results that they feel like their wins and losses are based on the numbers on the board. When if you can change your wins and losses to more of what I call an integrity based, which means that you do the things that you say you're going to do, then you can win every single day. Even if you bagel, you can still win every day. And the best part about that is the likelihood of bageling tomorrow decreases significantly if you just did the actions and you truly, truly believe that your results are only a byproduct of your actions. And so you put 100% focus on the actions as opposed to the byproduct, or the sits or the sets or the appointments or the closes.
Marry the process and not the results. I love that. It's so interesting, because this is what you deal with, on a daily basis. But I really see these two sets of people in the industry. Well, there's three sets. The first set of people would be, or grouping would be, come in and they just realize, I absolutely hate this. I don't care how much money this thing pays. I do not want to knock doors and do this. And then off they go. And then there's this other two groups of people, right, that have the competence, capability, work IQ, ability to go out, the work ethic, the tenacity to really go out and kind of get started. And they'll go in, and one set of people just intrinsically have this kind of gritty tenacity where they just, and some of it's just chopping your way through the forest. And you're like, I just got to get through this. And there's another group that starts to sink, and that's what happens. And I see that a lot. And it's, this is a problem, and that is a problem, and he is a problem, and she's a problem, and he's better than me, and he's worse than me, and he's getting it, and they're not getting it. And it's the this, and it's the that, and it's the area, and it's the door, and it's my car, and it's the sky, and it's my dog, and it's and it's like, no, it's the same doors. Like and you'll have people knocking like behind each other in the same area, and the A rep gets 4 or 5 accounts created, and in the same neighborhood that B rep was in last week and couldn't get anybody to talk to him under any circumstances. But it's because of how they're perceiving information, how they're acting, how their mind is working. And a lot of people get into this moment where they're so overwhelmed by all of these uncontrollable factors that they feel are infringing upon them, that what happens is it starts to freeze them out of action. And then they're all of a sudden they're working the hours, but not hard. And then they're not working the hours, and then they're barely working. And all that happens is they compound the problems and the problems and the problems because they're not controlling what they can control. You can control the information, the way that you intake information, the way that you perceive the information, and the way that you react to the information. And that's really all we have. I can't control what the homeowner does or what the door does or what another rep does or what my manager does. I just love what you're saying, man, because you get these. And so with those two groups of people, the guy that has kind of the grit, the tenacity built in, what is there in there obviously I know there's in there to teach. How do you level that person up? What does that look like?
Yeah, I have them go through the same process because it's preventative maintenance, right? It's going through these steps, taking ownership of these actions so that you can give yourself the best chances, regardless of the chaos of what's going on. The really interesting thing is most sports psychs work with professionals. They're not working with, kids and people that are still learning the game.
Yeah.
They're working with high level, like literally the best people in the world, right? And it's because they're teaching them concepts so that they can use the skill set that they have. An example that I use a lot because he's a product of Ken Ravizza, guy named Evan Longoria. And he will tell you straight up that he would not have played professional baseball at all if it wasn't for meeting Ken Ravizza. And he has a super simple process that he goes through where he before stepping in the box, he thinks certain thoughts that are unique to him, right? Connecting with his why, identifying the actions he's going to take. And then before stepping into the box, he looks up at the left field foul pole. There's always a left field foul pole, right? He's quieting his eyes, right? And then he takes a slow, deep breath, right? It's the exact same steps. Now, this is a guy who's been an MVP. He's been an all-star. He's got like home run records. Like he's had an amazing career. And guess what? He's still doing all of those things. And it's not like he does it when he's struggling. He does it every single pitch, not just every single at bat, but between pitches, he does this same exact process. And for him, he understands that it's the price of high quality, right? It's the price of increasing his chances for success.
Well, it's the adage, winners win because they do the things that winners do, right? And it's having, professional habits, having professional mental habits, physical habits, spiritual habits that help you and I love that. And I understand exactly what you're saying. And a lot of what I've done over the years, I don't know, I guess I do know from my childhood where some of the things, the grit and the tenacity that I have and kind of the hustle, just the busyness of my mind, that's just how I operate. And when I really got into door to door, I started identifying my first year in alarms, I was the national sales rookie of the year for Vivint, unbeknownst to me. But I remember, and I'm very proud of that year. It was one of the hardest years in my life. And it was all out of fear. I was just scared to fail. I was scared to not pay my bills. I'm selling alarms. Vivint is an amazing company. I absolutely love Vivint. But an alarm salesman is different than a solar salesman. We have to produce a lot more volume to get, not quite as much money. So what I hit the streets running. My first week, I sold 7 alarms. That year, I sold 213 alarms. But I think back, and I was good because I had some things intrinsically in me. And so what I've done over the years through the reading, I've been able to identify some of the things that I was good at and capitalize on those. So when I became cognitively aware of what I was good at, I would say, "Oh, I do that. That's what I do." And then I'm reading on why it's done or how it's done. I get better in it. And so that's a lot of what I'm hearing from what you're saying on the high level end. So it sounds like on the rep that's having the mental I don't want to say breakdowns, but the issues with toughness and grit, there's a lot of help for those guys. But then for the rep who is already accelerating, there's a lot of help for those guys because you're just taking what's good and helping that person be more cognitive and identify those things and capitalize on that. So I understand exactly what you're saying. And that's what I tell my people with books is, that's books just, reading has just helped me so much in conversations like this. So I love it.
Yeah.
So what does it look like? What does your program look like? Unpack it for us a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's having a conversation, it's understanding one another, but then getting people to start taking action. The quicker they start acting, the better. And so I teach all of these concepts, and then it's more a matter of accountability and I guess refining, right? So when people, get up to bat and then they start to notice things and you make those tweaks. And so, and I've found that most people, when they struggle, it's simply because they're not doing one of the very simple things. And so it really is just a matter of learning the system, applying it, and then being accountable to it. And ultimately my goal is to get it to the point where people identify as this system is part of who they are. So one of the biggest problems in the industry is that people's connection or their why is about things they're trying to get. It's about things that they're after. But if your why is about who you are as a person and the actions that you take, that is so much more powerful, right? Like I mentioned, the rock climber climbs rocks, right? There are actions that are associated with that. And so if you, the other biggest problem in the industry is that people don't take ownership or pride in their job. Like I know so many people that have been knocking for years and still struggle to talk about what they do because they lack the pride in it. And so I think that if you look at the job as something that you should take so much pride, because I was talking to a friend, he lives in a neighborhood, very nice neighborhood full of doctors, lawyers, attorneys, I guess that's the same thing, dentists, like all these people, right, that went the traditional route. And they struggle to get to know their neighbors because they don't want us to be like, oh yeah, I knock doors and sell solar. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You work less hours, are in way less debt than them because of all the
student
schooling
debt and make more money.
You spend more time with your family, like all of these perks, because you can sell people stuff that benefits them and blesses their life. Like, are you kidding me? Take ownership of that, take pride in that. And as you do so, then you can start to understand the actions that you take that are defined by who that person is. And so if you can connect your why to that, then that is going to be so much more powerful than like the vague thing of like, well, I'm working for my family. Like, well, okay, so what does that mean?
That's a nugget, man. So listen, I am in love with door-to-door sales, man. I love it. I scream it from the toppest mountains. Like, I love it. And so, but I do know people who have that. And so, and I love the way that you just connected because I've heard that over the years, but not as simply put, and we had a text thread with the leadership today. There's tons of people. They said, what's your why? And, and I posted a picture of my daughter. I'm like, this is my why. But you're right. If I go deeper than that, that's not my why. My why is how do I interact with the world on a daily basis from my job duties? That's like saying, so what you're saying is like, hey, I'm a rock climber, but I don't want to tell anybody because I'm kind of ashamed of it. Well, I need to, if I want to define myself in that moment, I have to define myself by how am I eating to do what I need to do? Like, what is my weight? Because it's harder to pull up a bigger body. How am I training to do that? Am I going out and climbing rocks? What are the mechanisms that I'm doing? So the way that I just transition that from, my daughter is a part of my why, but the deeper, more resonating part of that is I want to show her what kind of adult to be, who to be. I think of leadership as servitude. Am I serving my people? Am I being honest? Do I have integrity? Do I take action? Do I stay out of fear and look for solutions to problems? Those really are my whys. That's what drives me as a human being. That's what makes me happy. And then therefore my daughter sees who I am as an example. But you're right. When you're on doors at 8:30 at night and 55 people have told you no, and 6 people have slammed their door, and security's chased you out of the neighborhood, me just going like, oh boy, I love Lotus. That's going to make me knock my daughter. That's going to make me knock more doors. It doesn't. When you can fall into that, when it gets this hard, what I do, my why is being a soldier, is having mental grit and fortitude and forging through this into my account created or my homeowner. So I love that. It was a really eloquent, simple way to unpack your why. It's tied to your actions and what you do rather than people or vague things.
Yeah. And I think it's okay to have those vague things, but they need to be a reminder of the specific things, right? So looking at a picture of your daughter needs to have neural pathways built, right? It's not about your daughter. It's about all those things that you mentioned, right? People want to buy a fancy car. Good on you. That's fine. But I want you to, when you see a picture of that car, I want to see you painted with their bloody knuckles from knocking so many doors, right? It has to be about the identity of who you are. And you're not a person who drives a fancy car. You're a person who knocks when you don't want to. You're a person that keeps going, even though the cops just got called on you and got thrown out of an area. You're right. And you can list all of these things, but that's who you are as a person. That's who you are internally. And so reminding yourself of those things, because that's the only way that you're actually going to get the house, the car, everything that your daughter deserves, and teach her those lessons is going to be by actually doing those actions.
I love that. I love that. So I have a few team members here in Vegas that just purchased their first house. And, you see the stuff on Facebook and you see it and they're texting and, everybody's happy. And it's like, oh, you got a new house. What I got to experience was the 2 years of work that they put in to get to that, and they have, they'll know who I'm talking about when they listen to the podcast, but for their son, what they've done for him, so it's the iceberg, right? And what you're talking about is their why to be better people and go out and have the grit and tenacity and fortitude to do the 2 years of work it took from, building credit and all of the things that all of us have to do when we purchase our first house. Listen, 20% of the medium house price here is $500,000. That's a lot of cash to have in the bank. We have a great career here, but it takes time to get that. And so what I saw those two individuals work their asses off for those 2 years. And then on Facebook, everybody sees the tip of the iceberg, that house that they just bought. And I'm an emotional guy, and it brought me to tears when they bought it. Cause I'm like, I saw you guys work so hard for that for so long. So I love what you're talking about, because it resonates to what I've done and what I've seen other successful people do. Is it's the house is a why, but that doesn't get you through the tough moments. So like identifying that stuff. So I love that, Chris. It's
and
great.
I think when the hard stuff happens too, you identify and process that as something that you signed up for. Mm-hmm. Like this is, I tell this story all the time and I'll make it brief, but this soldier basically broke his nose right in front of me, fell in the mud. It was a mess. And when I say broke his nose, it was like blood fountaining out of his face. Like it was gnarly. His nose was like over here. Yeah. And it was just brutal. And the guy's response, right? He takes a couple breaths, he closes his eyes, throws his fists in the air, and he's like, this is going to make the greatest story. This is what I signed up for. And it's like when you get thrown out by the cops, this is what you signed up for.
Yeah.
When somebody, slams the door in your face, this is what you signed up for. And as you start to shift to responding that way, man, nothing can touch you, right? It's the whole David Goggins mentality of can't hurt me.
Love Goggins. Yeah.
And it's, it's easier said than done. And I think that's really why I created such a simple system for people to follow so that they can go door after door after door. And regardless of what happens, they know how to respond. They know how to move forward, and they know how to keep executing regardless of how they feel.
Yeah. Well, when we're ruled off, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'm human. I don't feel like doing most of the stuff that I do, but I don't live my life off my feelings. I do. I love what you're saying, because I'm just tracking so much of this, because I have a lot of it built into me, and a lot of it's just been built up over time. But yeah, you're right. It's like, I love, this is what you signed up for, man. What a nugget of a thought. Like, I'm going to use that 100%. That was today. I was going to correlate. I've been doing correlation for a long time. I come in 5 days a week. Like, I don't feel like, well, this is what you signed up for, bud. Like, in my internal voice, like, in the hardest moment you get, and I love Goggins, man. He just, the callousing of the mind. And a lot of that's what we're talking about here, but what are the pathways? So it sounds like when you're with a guy or a gal, a rep, you're working with them on a fairly one-on-one basis. Is that right?
Yeah, I do a
courses?
lot of options.
Okay.
Yeah, so I do group stuff. I come into organizations and I'll speak and give them the highlights, but mostly the actionable steps that they can take. The benefit of doing one-on-one stuff, like anything, is you just get more specific. The more that you do it.
I love it.
And it's, the funny thing is, I had no intention of getting into sales, right? I didn't even realize the extent of the door-to-door industry when I started. It was more just like, okay, this thing's needed, so go help people. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, I'll teach them the same stuff as I teach these soldiers. And
it fits.
That first guy I worked with doubled his sales.
Wow.
And the results have been pretty consistent.
Yeah.
And so it's, I think at the end of the day, people always talk about dollars and cents, but for people that are listening, if they want to level up, not only their bank account, but themselves as a person, and they're willing to do work for it, hit me up. Let's talk.
I love it. It's what happens in this industry is money follows value. So the more valuable of a human being you become, the more money that will come. And I think a lot of us in this industry define success by the sowing and not the reaping. But to sow better seeds, you have to learn. So, Chris, where do people find you? So I got you here on Instagram, but I will gladly butcher any Instagram handle. So I'm going to let you give us all the information. Where can we find you on Insta? Where can we find you on email? Where can folks find you to get with you to learn?